The coffee mug slipped from my fingers when I saw my sister standing at my door that October morning. Not because I was surprised to see Rachel. She owned the house I'd been renting for the past 3 years. It was the manila envelope in her hand, and the way she couldn't quite meet my eyes that made my hands shake. "Can I come in?" she asked, though she was already stepping past me into what was technically her property. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd need to invite my own sister into a house she owned. I watched her perfectly manicured nails drum against the envelope as she settled onto my second-hand couch. The same couch she'd wrinkled her nose at when I'd moved in after leaving David. The divorce had been finalized just 2 weeks ago, and I was still finding my footing, still waking up and forgetting for a split second that my life had completely imploded. "Isabella, we need to talk," Rachel said, using that tone she'd perfected since marrying Mark and moving to the suburbs. That careful, practiced voice that suggested she'd rehearsed this conversation in her BMW on the way over. "If this is about last month's rent, I told you I'd have it by." "It's not about last month." She cut me off, finally looking at me directly. "It's about all of it. The situation. Mark and I have been talking, and—" She slid the envelope across the coffee table between us. "We need you to move out." The words hit me like physical blows. I stared at the envelope, unable to process what was happening. You're evicting me?" "Don't be so dramatic," Rachel sighed, crossing her legs in her designer jeans. "It's not personal, Bella. It's business. We've been carrying you for months now, and with the divorce and your situation, we just can't afford to keep subsidizing your life." Subsidizing, as if the below-market rent I'd been paying wasn't still rent. As if I hadn't helped them with the down payment for this very house 5 years ago when Mark's business was struggling. "I've never missed a payment," I said quietly, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. I'd been late a few times during the divorce proceedings when David had frozen our joint accounts out of spite. "You've been late 4 times in the last 6 months, Rachel recited, clearly having prepared for this argument. "And now, with your reduced hours at that startup," she said startup, like it was a dirty word, like my job as a software engineer at a small tech company was somehow less legitimate than Mark's real estate ventures. "My hours aren't reduced by choice," I reminded her. "The company is restructuring. It's temporary." "Everything with you is temporary, Isabella." The words came out sharper than she probably intended, and I saw a flicker of something, guilt maybe, cross her face before she hardened again. "You're 35 years old. When are you going to get your life together?" I thought about reminding her that I'd had my life together. I'd had a house, a husband, a stable job at a Fortune 500 company. But then David had decided his secretary was more interesting than his wife of 8 years, and somehow I'd become the villain in that story. The demanding wife who worked too much, who couldn't give him children fast enough, who made him feel trapped. "How long do I have?" I asked instead, picking up the envelope with hands that had gone numb. 30 days. It's all in there. Mark found a property management company that can get us market rate for this place, $2,800 a month. You're only paying $1,500, and we just can't." She trailed off, standing up abruptly. "It's nothing personal." She kept saying that. Nothing personal. As if kicking your recently divorced sister out onto the street was just another business transaction. "What about Mom?" I asked as she headed for the door. "What does she think about this?" Rachel paused, her hand on the doorknob. "Mom agrees that you need tough love. You can't keep running to family every time life gets hard." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like finality. I sat there for a long time, staring at the envelope, afraid to open it and make it real. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother. Rachel told me, "This is for your own good, sweetheart. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet." I almost laughed at the irony. Stand on my own 2 feet. As if I hadn't been doing exactly that, paying rent, working full-time, rebuilding my life piece by piece after David had torn it apart. But apparently, struggling made me weak in their eyes. Needing time to recover from having my life upended made me a failure. I opened the envelope finally, scanning the legal language that basically amounted to, "Get out. You're not welcome here anymore." My own family had decided I wasn't worth the inconvenience. The house felt different now, knowing I had 30 days to leave it. The small kitchen where I'd taught myself to cook for one, the bedroom where I cried myself to sleep for months, the living room where I'd slowly started to feel human again, all of it would soon belong to strangers who could afford market rate. My phone rang, and I almost didn't answer when I saw it was my boss, Marcus, calling on a Saturday. "Isabella, I know it's the weekend, but I have news that couldn't wait," he said, and something in his voice made me sit up straighter. "I just got off a call with the board. The acquisition is going through. Technova is buying us out for $2.8 billion. The words didn't compute at first. Our little startup acquired? What does that mean for us? It means your stock options are about to be worth approximately $3.2 million after taxes. Congratulations, Isabella. You're about to be a millionaire." The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the floor. I stared at the eviction notice still clutched in my other hand, then at the phone where Marcus was calling my name, asking if I was still there. $3.2 million. I picked up the phone slowly. "Marcus, when does this happen?" "The deal closes in 6 months. Keep this quiet until the official announcement Monday, but I wanted you to know first. You've been instrumental in building our platform. You deserve this." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my soon-to-be former home, holding an eviction notice in one hand and the promise of millions in the other. The same family who deemed me a failure, a charity case, had no idea that their weak sister was about to have more money than they'd see in a lifetime. I thought about calling Rachel back, telling her the news, watching her backpedal and suddenly discover family loyalty. But something stopped me. A small, dark voice in the back of my mind that whispered, "Let them show you who they really are." I had 30 days to find a new place to live. 30 days to pretend everything was normal while secretly planning my next moves. And 6 months until everything changed. The eviction notice crumpled in my fist as I made my decision. They wanted to treat this as just business? Fine. I'd show them exactly what kind of businesswoman their failure of a sister could be. Capitulo 2. 6 months of silence. The U-Haul truck pulled away from Rachel's rental property on a gray November morning, taking the last 3 years of my life with it. I stood on the curb, watching it disappear around the corner, my entire existence now reduced to what could fit in a 10-foot truck in a studio apartment across town. "You sure you don't want to stay with us for a few weeks?" my friend Zoe asked, loading the last box into her car. "My couch is always open." I shook my head, managing a smile. I need to do this on my own. Apparently, it's time I learned to stand on my own 2 feet. The bitterness in my voice made her wince. Zoe had been there through the divorce, through the nights when I couldn't stop crying, through the moment I discovered David had been cheating for 2 years, not 6 months like he'd claimed. She was the only one who knew about the acquisition, the only person I trusted with that secret. "Your family are assholes," she said bluntly. "When they find out." "They won't find out? Not until I'm ready." The studio apartment was a far cry from the house I'd shared with David or even Rachel's rental, 600 square feet in a building that had seen better days, but it was mine, and no one could kick me out of it. I'd paid 6 months up front in cash, telling the landlord I was between jobs and wanted to secure the place. He hadn't asked questions after seeing the money. Those 6 months became my metamorphosis, By day, I threw myself into work, helping navigate the complex acquisition process. By night, I studied real estate law, LLC formations, and property management. I opened accounts at different banks, set up a trust, created a business entity. I became a ghost in my own family's life, politely declining Thanksgiving because of work obligations, sending a card for Christmas with a generic message. "Are you even trying to get back on your feet?" my mother asked during one of her monthly check-in calls, each one feeling more like a welfare inspection than maternal concern. "Rachel says she hasn't seen you at any of the networking events she suggested." "I'm focusing on work, Mom. The startup is going through changes." "That startup," she sighed. "Honestly, Isabella, when are you going to get a real job?" Mark knows people at several firms downtown. Stable companies with benefits and retirement plans. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Mark, who'd built his real estate empire on leveraged debt and questionable deals. Mark, who I'd later discover was 3 months behind on property taxes for his LLC, bleeding money from bad investments while maintaining the facade of success. "I'll think about it," I lied, watching my laptop screen where my stock portfolio showed a number that still didn't feel real. The acquisition was announced in January, making headlines in the tech world. I watched my phone, waiting for it to ring, for my family to put the pieces together. But the call never came. They didn't even know the name of the little startup I worked for, had never bothered to ask beyond dismissive comments about playing with computers. Marcus called me into his office the day the funds were released. "So what's next for you? Staying on with Tech Nova? Starting your own company? Early retirement to a beach somewhere?" "Actually," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded, "I'm thinking about getting into real estate." He laughed. "Tech to real estate? That's quite a pivot." "Let's just say I've recently developed an interest in property management." The first thing I did was hire a private investigator. Not to dig up dirt, I wasn't that petty. I just wanted to understand the full scope of Mark and Rachel's business dealings. What I found was illuminating. Their LLC, Mr. Property Holdings, owned 12 rental properties across the city, leveraged to the hilt. They were making money, but barely, walking a tightrope between success and catastrophe. The property tax situation was worse than I'd thought. They'd been juggling payments, using rent from one property to pay taxes on another, a shell game that was about to catch up with them. The notice of tax sale was posted in February, giving them 90 days to pay or face auction. I waited, watched, prepared. "You look good," Zoe said over coffee in March, studying me across the table. "Different? More, I don't know, confident?" "Money does that," I admitted. "Not the having it, but the not needing anyone else's." "Have you talked to your family at all?" "My mom calls monthly to remind me I'm a disappointment." Rachel sent a text on my birthday, just HBD with a cake emoji. Dad does whatever Mom tells him to do." "And when are you going to tell them?" I smiled, the kind of smile I'd been practicing in the mirror. Calm, controlled, giving nothing away. "When the time is right." That time came in April when the tax auction was announced. 12 properties, including the house they'd evicted me from, all going up for public auction due to $847,000 in unpaid taxes and penalties. I'd incorporated my LLC, Phoenix Holdings, 2 months prior, all paperwork filed under my company's tax ID, nothing that would trace back to Isabella Martinez, the failure sister who couldn't keep a husband or a stable life. The morning of the auction, I dressed carefully. Not in the power suit I'd imagined during my revenge fantasies, but in simple, professional clothes that wouldn't draw attention. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to make a purchase. Mark was there, of course, sweating through his polo shirt as he desperately bid against other investors, trying to save at least some of his properties. I watched from the back, my representative handling the bidding on my behalf. One by one, the properties fell. Mark managed to scrape together enough to save 3. The other 9, including Rachel's rental house, went to Phoenix Holdings for $1.3 million total. Congratulations, the clerk said, handing over the deed transfers. That's quite a portfolio you've acquired. Just business, I replied, echoing my sister's words from 6 months ago. The best part about buying properties at a tax auction is that the previous owners don't immediately know who bought them. It takes time for the paperwork to process, for the new ownership to be recorded. I had maybe 2 weeks before Mark started digging, before he figured out who was behind Phoenix Holdings. 2 weeks to prepare for the reunion I'd been imagining since the day Rachel handed me that eviction notice. I hired a property management company to handle the transition, to send out the notices to existing tenants about the change in ownership. All very professional, all very by the book. The rent increases were modest, just bringing everything up to market rate. After all, it wasn't personal, it was just business. The call came on a Tuesday evening as I was reviewing renovation plans for one of the properties. Isabella? Rachel's voice was strained, confused. I just got a notice that our LLC no longer owns the Maple Street property. Did Mark sell it without telling me? You should probably ask Mark about that, I suggested mildly. I did. He's saying something about a tax auction, but that doesn't make sense. We would have gotten notices. Like an eviction notice? I interrupted quietly. Those kinds of notices? The silence stretched between us, heavy with realization. What did you do? She whispered. Nothing personal, I said, savoring the echo of her own words. Just business. Your new landlord will be in touch about the rent increase. Market rate, of course. I believe it's going up to $2,800, just like you wanted. Isabella, wait. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from nerves. From anticipation. 6 months of silence, of planning, of watching them continue to live their lives, oblivious to the storm that was coming. My phone immediately exploded with calls and texts. Rachel, Mark, my mother, my father, who hadn't called me since the divorce. I let them all go to voicemail, each message more frantic than the last. Instead, I called Zoe. Want to come with me to inspect my new properties tomorrow? Is it happening? She asked excitedly. Is this the big reveal? Just the beginning, I promised. The real story is what comes next. Because the truth was, the money and the properties were just the opening move. What I really wanted was for them to understand how it felt to be deemed worthless by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. To be reduced to a business decision, a line item that didn't generate enough return. Tomorrow, I would face them as their landlord, as the person who held their financial future in my hands. But tonight, I sat in my small studio apartment, surrounded by legal documents and property deeds, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. Not the cruel kind that David had wielded in our marriage, or that Rachel had shown with that eviction. But the quiet power of someone who'd been underestimated and was about to prove exactly how wrong they'd been. Capítulo 3. The Confrontation. The doorbell of my studio apartment rang at 7 in the morning, harsh and insistent. I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. Only family would show up unannounced at this hour, feeling entitled to my time. Rachel stood in the hallway, Mark behind her, both looking like they'd aged 5 years overnight. My mother was there too, clutching her purse like a weapon, and even my father, who usually let the women handle family drama. We know you're in there, Isabella, Rachel called out. Your car is in the parking lot. I took my time, pouring coffee, adding cream, taking a sip before finally opening the door. Good morning. This is a surprise. Don't. My mother pushed past me into the apartment, her eyes scanning the small space with obvious disapproval. Don't you dare act like you don't know why we're here. Please, come in, I said dryly, stepping aside as the rest of them filed in. My studio suddenly felt even smaller with 4 extra people crowding the space. Mark's face was red, a vein pulsing in his temple. You bought our properties. You deliberately targeted our business. I bought properties at a public auction, I corrected, keeping my voice level. Properties that were available because someone didn't pay their taxes. That's not targeting, that's opportunity. You knew we were struggling, Rachel's voice cracked. You knew and you waited like a vulture. Did I? I set my coffee down carefully, because 6 months ago, you told me you needed to charge market rate, that you couldn't afford to subsidize my life. You seemed to be doing just fine when you were evicting me. That was different, my mother interjected. We were trying to help you. By making me homeless? You weren't homeless, Rachel snapped. You're being dramatic, as usual. We gave you 30 days. To find somewhere else to live after my divorce, while I was rebuilding my life. Yes, how generous. The anger I'd kept carefully controlled for 6 months began to simmer. Tell me, Rachel, how much did I loan you for the down payment on that house? The one you kicked me out of? Her face flushed. That was years ago. $15,000, which you never paid back, by the way. But I didn't bring it up because we're family, and family helps each other. Or so I thought. You vindictive little... Mark started forward, but my father, surprisingly, held him back. How? My father spoke for the first time, his voice quiet. How did you afford this? I met his eyes, seeing genuine curiosity rather than accusation. My worthless startup job? The one you all mocked? We were acquired for $2.8 billion. My stock options were worth $3.2 million after taxes. The silence was deafening. I watched their faces cycle through disbelief, calculation, and then something uglier, greed. You've been a millionaire for months? My mother's voice was barely a whisper. And you didn't tell your family? The same family who called me a failure? Who said I needed tough love? Who treated me like a charity case they couldn't wait to get rid of? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Why would I tell you? We could have helped you invest it properly, Mark said, trying to shift into business mode. I have connections. The same connections that left you $847,000 behind in property taxes? His face went purple. That's temporary cash flow issue. It's mismanagement, I cut him off. You over-leveraged, made bad deals, and juggled payments until it caught up with you. I did my homework, Mark. I know exactly how badly you've been running that LLC. So what now? Rachel's voice was small, defeated. You're our landlord. You're raising our rent. You've made your point. What do you want? What did I want? For 6 months, I'd imagined this moment. The confrontation, the reveal, their faces when they realized their failure sister held their future in her hands. But now, looking at them crowded into my tiny apartment, I felt empty. I want you to understand, I said finally. I want you to understand what it feels like to be reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet. To have your worth calculated by what you can provide financially. We're family, my mother said, reaching for the manipulation she'd always been so good at. Family forgives. Family supports each other. Funny how family only matters when you need something. Don't be cruel, Isabella. My father's disappointment was evident. This isn't who we raised you to be. No, I agreed. You raised me to be quiet, compliant, to accept whatever scraps of affection you threw my way. To be grateful when my own sister let me rent her property at below market rate, and to disappear quietly when I became inconvenient. "So this is revenge?" Rachel asked. "You're going to bankrupt us out of spite?" I walked to my desk, pulling out a folder I'd prepared weeks ago. "These are your new lease agreements. Market rate, as you wanted. $2,800 for the Maple Street house. Similar increases for the other properties to bring them in line with current rates. We can't afford." "Then you'll have to make adjustments. Maybe get a real job instead of playing real estate mogul with borrowed money." I handed the folder to Mark. "Or you can move. I hear there are some studios available across town." "Very character building." "You're enjoying this," my mother accused. "No," I said honestly. "I thought I would. I thought making you feel what I felt would fix something inside me. But it doesn't. It just makes me sad that we got here." "Then why?" "Because you need to learn that actions have consequences. That treating people as disposable might come back to haunt you. That success isn't measured by money or property or looking good at country club brunches." My phone buzzed, a message from my property manager about scheduling inspections. "Business continuing regardless of family drama." "There is one option," I said, watching hope flicker in their eyes. "I'm willing to sell the properties back to you. At cost, plus the back taxes I paid. No profit for me." "Isabella, that's," Rachel started. "On one condition." I pulled out another document. "You signed this contract acknowledging what you did. Acknowledging that you evicted your sister 2 weeks after her divorce finalized. That you chose money over family. That you were wrong." "That's humiliation," Mark sputtered. "That's accountability." They left with the documents, promising to review them, to discuss. But I knew they'd sign. Their pride was expensive, but not $1.3 million expensive. Alone again in my studio, I sat by the window, watching their cars pull away. My phone rang. Marcus, probably calling about the transition to Tech Nova. "Hey," I answered. "How's the integration going?" "Smoothly." "Hey, I heard through the grapevine you're getting into real estate. Starting a new empire?" "Something like that," I said, looking at the photos of properties on my laptop. "Although I'm thinking about something different. Affordable housing maybe. Rent-to-own programs for people rebuilding their lives." "That's not exactly lucrative." "Maybe not. But it might be worth something more than money." 2 days later, the signed documents arrived by courier. My family had agreed to buy back their properties, had acknowledged their treatment of me. The last page had a note in my mother's handwriting. "We're sorry." 2 words. Not enough to heal the wound, but maybe enough to start. I signed the sale documents, setting the process in motion. They'd have their properties back, their business, their carefully constructed lives. And I'd have my $3.2 million and the knowledge that when pushed to the bottom, I'd found a way to rise. But the real plot twist was what I did next. 2. Capítulo 4. The Real Inheritance. The closing was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at a title company downtown. I arrived early, sitting in my car in the parking lot, watching the spring rain create rivers on the windshield. In my bag was the deed transfer paperwork that would return the 9 properties to my family, ending this chapter of our complicated story. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "You sure about this? They don't deserve your forgiveness." She was right, of course. They didn't deserve it. But forgiveness wasn't really about what people deserved, was it? The conference room was sterile, all glass and chrome, the kind of place where families were reduced to signatures and notarized documents. Rachel arrived first, dressed in the same kind of designer outfit she'd worn to evict me, but something was different. The confidence was gone, replaced by something I recognized from my own mirror 6 months ago: defeat. "Isabella," she said quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. Mark followed, then my parents. We sat around the conference table like strangers, which maybe we were. The family I thought I knew wouldn't have discarded me so easily. But then again, the person they thought they knew wouldn't have orchestrated such an elaborate response. The title agent walked us through the paperwork with professional detachment. Sign here, initial there, the transfer of property reduced to bureaucratic efficiency. I watched my family sign away their humiliation clause, officially acknowledging what they'd done. There's one more document, I said when we reached the inn, pulling out a folder I'd kept separate. What now? Mark's voice was tired, resigned. The past week had broken something in him. It's a business proposal. I spread the papers across the table. I'm starting a housing nonprofit. Transitional homes for people rebuilding their lives. Divorce, job loss, medical bankruptcy. Below market rent with the option to build equity toward ownership. They stared at the proposal, confusion evident on their faces. I need someone to manage the properties, I continued. Someone with experience in real estate, even if that experience includes some failures. I'm offering you the job, Mark. Salary, benefits, and the chance to do something meaningful with your knowledge. You're offering me a job? His voice cracked. After everything? I'm offering you a chance to use what you've learned. All of it, the successes and the mistakes. Why? My mother's question was barely a whisper. I'd asked myself the same thing countless times over the past week. The answer had come to me during a late-night conversation with Marcus about legacy and impact. Because holding on to anger is like renting space in your head to someone who's already moved out, I said. And because maybe we all need a chance to be better than our worst moments. This is about that eviction, Rachel said, understanding dawning. You want to help people who went through what you did. What we did to you, my father corrected quietly, speaking up for the second time in this whole saga. What we did was wrong, Isabella. I should have stood up for you. I should have been a better father. It was the first real acknowledgement, beyond signed documents and forced apologies. Something inside me, frozen for months, began to thaw. The properties you're selling back to me, I said. I want to convert 3 of them for the nonprofit. Families in crisis could have up to a year to get back on their feet, with counseling services, job training, financial planning. Real help, not just temporary shelter. That's, Rachel paused, calculating. That's nearly $1 million in property value you're giving up. It's an investment, I corrected, in the belief that people deserve second chances. Even people who don't offer them to others. Mark was reading through the proposal, his business mind engaged despite everything. This could work. With the right structure, tax benefits, corporate sponsorships, this could really work. So you're interested? He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since I'd known him. I spent the last week thinking my life was over. That everything I'd built was gone. It's a terrible feeling. Yes, I agreed simply. It is. I'm sorry, he said, the word seeming to surprise him. I'm sorry for treating you like a number instead of family. For letting Rachel. He glanced at his wife. For going along with something I knew was wrong because it was easier than standing up for what was right. Rachel was crying now, silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. I was so angry, she whispered. At David for hurting you. At you for not bouncing back faster. At myself for not knowing how to help. So I pushed you away instead. I told myself it was for your own good, but really, I just didn't want to see you struggle because it made me feel helpless. I know, I said, and surprisingly, I did. Fear makes us do terrible things to the people we love. So what happens now? My mother asked. Do we just pretend the last 6 months didn't happen? No, I shook my head. We can't pretend, but maybe we can build something new. Something more honest than what we had before. The title agent, who'd been professionally ignoring our family drama, cleared his throat. If we could complete the signatures. We signed the final documents, the properties officially changing hands. But instead of the ending I'd originally planned, walking away with my vindication and their money, we found ourselves still sitting around the table, nobody quite ready to leave. I have a condition, Mark said suddenly, for taking the job. I raised an eyebrow, amused by his negotiation attempt. Oh? Family dinners? Real ones. Once a month minimum. No business talk, no judgment, just family. That's blackmail, I said, but I was smiling. That's accountability. He echoed my earlier words. My mother reached across the table, her hand hovering near mine, not quite touching. We have a lot to make up for. I know that. But if you're willing to try. I took her hand, feeling the weight of all our broken history and tentative future in that simple gesture. I'm willing to try. The meeting ended with awkward hugs and promises to review the nonprofit paperwork. As I walked to my car, Rachel caught up with me. The house, she said. The one I evicted you from. I think it should be the first property you convert. It seems right somehow. Full circle. I thought about that little house, where I'd rebuilt myself after my divorce, where I'd received both an eviction notice and news of millions on the same day, where I'd learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters. Full circle, I agreed. 6 months later, I stood in front of that same house, now bearing a discreet plaque. Phoenix House, a place to rise. The first families had moved in the week before. A teacher leaving an abusive marriage, a veteran who'd lost his job, a young mother escaping domestic violence. Each with a year to rebuild, to find their footing, to prove that everyone deserved more than being reduced to their worst moment. Mark had thrown himself into the project with the passion of someone given a second chance. He'd secured corporate sponsorships, negotiated with contractors, even started teaching financial literacy classes to residents. The man who'd once seen people as profit margins now knew their names, their stories, their dreams. The city council wants to meet about expanding the program, he told me as we watched children play in the yard that had once been mine. 3 other neighborhoods are interested. And I told them we'd need to start slow, do it right. That people aren't just numbers to be rushed through a system. I smiled. You've learned. I had a good teacher. Rachel emerged from the house, where she'd been leading a support group for divorced women. Another surprise, my sister, who'd once been too uncomfortable with my struggle to help, now facilitated discussions about rebuilding after loss. Mom called, she said. She's bringing dinner for everyone tonight. Dad's coming straight from the airport. He doesn't want to miss it. These monthly dinners had become more than obligation. They'd become real, messy, complicated gatherings where we were learning to be family again. Not the perfect family we pretended to be before, but something more honest. Hey, Rachel said quietly, watching a woman carry boxes into what had once been my bedroom. I know I can never really make up for what I did. But I want you to know, I'm proud of you. Not for the money or the revenge or even for forgiving us, but for taking the worst thing that happened to you and turning it into something that helps others. Tentar novamente continuar editor. I learned something, I told her, watching the new resident arrange her few belongings with the same careful hope I'd once felt. Rock bottom isn't always a curse. Sometimes it's the foundation you build everything else on. My phone buzzed with an email from Marcus. TechNova was interested in funding an expansion of the program to Silicon Valley, where tech workers facing sudden layoffs needed transitional housing. The irony wasn't lost on me. The industry that had made me millions now wanted to help others who'd lost everything. There's something else, Rachel said, pulling out an envelope. I've been carrying this around for weeks, not sure when to give it to you. Inside was a check for $15,000. The loan I'd given her years ago for her house down payment. Rachel, you don't have to. Yes, I do. It's not about the money. It's about acknowledging that even when you had less, you gave. Even when we treated you as less than, you were always more than we deserved. I tucked the check away, knowing it would go directly into the nonprofit fund. Every dollar meant another month someone could rebuild, another chance for a phoenix to rise. That evening, as promised, my mother arrived with enough food to feed an army. Dad came straight from his business trip, still in his suit but relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. We sat around mismatched tables in the common area, sharing meals with residents who'd become extended family. I've been thinking, my mother said, serving her famous enchiladas to a single father who lost his home to medical debt. I have all these connections from the country club. Women who lunch and want to feel useful. What if we started a mentorship program? Professional women helping residents with job interviews resume building? 6 months ago, she'd been embarrassed by my failure. Now she was brainstorming ways to help others in the same position. People could change, given the chance and the reason. That's brilliant, Mark said, already pulling out his phone to take notes. We could partner with local businesses, create an internship pipeline. Slow down, I laughed. One miracle at a time. But secretly, I was amazed at how the project had transformed not just the residents but my family. They discovered what I'd learned in my darkest moments, that your worth wasn't in your bank account or your address, but in your capacity to rise and lift others with you. Later that night, after the dinner was cleared and the residents had returned to their apartments, I stood alone in the backyard. The same yard where I'd cried after David left, where I'd planned my revenge after Rachel's eviction, where I'd learned to hope again. No regrets? Zoe appeared beside me, having arrived late from work. About which part? Any of it. The revenge, the forgiveness, giving up millions in property value for this. I thought about it, really considered the path that had led here. The pain of betrayal, the satisfaction of turning the tables, the surprising peace of letting go. The money from the acquisition could have bought me a lot of things, I said. A mansion, cars, the ability to never need anyone again. But this? I gestured to the lit windows of Phoenix House, each one representing a life in transition. This bought me something worth more. Which is purpose, family, the knowledge that the worst thing that happened to me became the catalyst for something beautiful. I smiled at my best friend, who'd stood by me through it all. And the sweetest revenge of all, proving that success isn't about having millions. It's about what you do when you rise. A year after that first confrontation in my studio apartment, I received an unexpected call. David, my ex-husband, had heard about the program through mutual friends. His voice was different, humbled, smaller than the confident man who'd left me for his secretary. I wanted to apologize, he said, and to ask, the woman I left you for, she left me for someone with more money. Poetic justice, I suppose. I lost my job, the house. I'm staying with friends, but you need help, I finished. I have no right to ask. Phoenix House has a unit available, I interrupted. The application process is the same for everyone. No special treatment, but no discrimination either. Everyone deserves a chance to rebuild. The silence on the other end was heavy with disbelief. After everything I did to you? Because of everything you did to me, I corrected. It led me here. Maybe your rock bottom can lead you somewhere better too. I didn't tell him about the millions, about how I could have destroyed him the way I'd almost destroyed my family. That wasn't the point anymore. The point was that hurt people, but healed people could choose to heal others. The program expanded faster than we'd imagined. By the second year, we had Phoenix houses in 3 cities, a network of corporate sponsors, and a waiting list of families needing help. Mark had become a nationally recognized advocate for transitional housing, speaking at conferences about second chances and the economics of compassion. Rachel's support groups had evolved into a comprehensive counseling program, helping hundreds of people navigate the emotional landscape of starting over. But the moment that meant the most came on an ordinary Tuesday, when I overheard a conversation between two residents in the community garden we'd planted behind the original house. "I used to think being here meant I'd failed," one woman said, carefully tending to tomato plants. "Like needing help made me weak." "What changed?" the other asked. "I met the founder. Found out she'd lived here too, after her divorce. That she'd been evicted by her own family, lost everything. But look what she built from that loss. Maybe falling isn't failing. Maybe it's just getting ready to fly." I slipped away before they could see me, tears blurring my vision. This was why I traded revenge for redemption, why I'd chosen to build rather than destroy. Because every person who walked through those doors deserved to know what I'd learned in my darkest moment, that sometimes the people who push you down are inadvertently giving you the push you need to soar. The text came that evening, as I was reviewing applications for our newest property. My sister, sending a photo from the support group she was leading. Women of all ages, all backgrounds, sitting in a circle in what had once been my living room, sharing their stories and strength. "Thank you," her message read, "for showing me that the best inheritance isn't money or property. It's the ability to transform pain into purpose. I love you." I smiled, typing back, "I love you too. See you at Sunday dinner?" "Wouldn't miss it. Mom's making tamales, and Mark promised to actually leave work on time. Dad's flying back early from his conference. He says family comes first now." Family. Such a complicated, messy, beautiful word. We'd almost lost each other to pride and fear and misplaced priorities. But in the end, the very betrayal that should have torn us apart had become the thing that taught us what really mattered. I looked around my new apartment, still modest by millionaire standards, but warm and full of life. The walls were covered with photos from Phoenix House, thank you notes from residents who'd moved on to permanent homes, newspaper clippings about our expansion. This was wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars. My laptop dinged with an email from a reporter wanting to do a feature on Phoenix House. The headline pitched was, "From Eviction to Empire: How One Woman Turned Family Betrayal into a Housing Revolution." I declined the interview, as I always did. This wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about revenge or vindication or proving anyone wrong. It was about the single mother moving into Phoenix House tomorrow, the veteran starting our job training program next week, the teenager aging out of foster care who'd have a safe place to land next month. But if I had given that interview, I would have said this: the best revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's building something so beautiful from your pain that it transforms everyone it touches, including the ones who caused the pain in the first place. 3 years after that October morning when Rachel handed me an eviction notice, I stood in the same doorway. But now, instead of my sister coming to kick me out, she was arriving to help welcome our 100th family to the Phoenix House program. "You ready?" she asked, squeezing my hand. "Ready," I said, thinking of all the families who'd find hope here, all the phoenixes waiting to rise. The doorbell rang, and together, my sister and I went to answer it. To offer someone else what we'd both learned the hard way, that rock bottom isn't the end of your story. It's just the beginning of your flight.